You're listening to the Cash Podcast, creating affluence, success, and happiness with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós, President and Portfolio Manager at Libertas Wealth Management Group at libertaswealth.com.
Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. Dan Brookman is joining me again today, and today is the final third portion of our three-part series on the three different types of insurance, life insurance, disability insurance, and long-term care insurance. So today, we're talking about long-term care insurance. But before I introduce what we're sharing today, get into the meat of the conversation, as always, a few housekeeping items. If this is your first time listening or watching, thank you so much for joining us. The Cash Podcast is produced weekly, and as stated in the intro, Cash stands for creating affluence, success, and happiness, and that's my goal. My hope is that you'll learn a little bit more on each and every episode so that you become more successful, happier, wealthier than you were when you started listening today, just by getting a little bit more educated and taking the first step in improving your own financial education. So come back often. Feel free to subscribe both on iTunes and YouTube. If you're a subscriber, you'll get these updates when they come out before everybody else does. In addition, you can also follow me on Twitter at Adam Koós and on Instagram at Financial Surgeon. And last but not least, again, we're not going to have any visuals, no charts, nothing like that in today's episode. It's just going to be us chit-chatting and having conversations today about long-term care insurance. But educational resources, links, anything you ever want to see is always available on our website at libertaswealth.com. And again, rather than jumping into a bio on Dan, head back to our first part of this three-part series 3 weeks ago. And you can hear about my friend Dan Brookman, how smart he is, and why you should hire him for your insurance needs. So the bio is in the life insurance portion. So let's get into the meaty conversation here. So Dan, long-term care, right? Mm-hmm. What are long-term care expenses? Let's dispel some myths here.
Yeah. So long-term care expenses are paying a professional to help you with your activities of daily living. There are 6 activities of daily living, at least as defined in a long-term care insurance policy, which we'll get into. But those 6 activities are eating, bathing, toileting, transferring, clothing, and continence.
Okay.
So those are your activities of daily living. Those are the things that you need to be able to do on a regular basis. And so paying a professional to help you with those things. This professional can be a nurse, but does not have to be. And this care can take place inside of your own home, could take place at an assisted living facility, or it could take place at a nursing home. And those are really what the costs, the services are when people talk about long-term care costs. It's a custodial care.
Okay. And isn't there a certain number of those activities that have to be met before a policy, let's just say if somebody owns insurance, before it even kick in?
Yeah, it's 2 out of 6 activities of daily living. So if you can't do 2 of the 6, that will trigger a long-term care claim on an insurance policy, or cognitive impairment. Cognitive impairment is an automatic qualifier. So Alzheimer's, dementia, if you're diagnosed as having that, well, then you automatically qualify to go on claim.
Got it. Okay. And I know one of the biggest myths that I've heard for years is that Medicare will take care of my long-term care expenses. Mm-hmm. And what's your thought on that?
Well, it certainly is a myth. It certainly will not take care of those expenses for you. Medicare will pay for the first 100 days under certain circumstances, like if the claim starts in a hospital. I don't even remember it. I think they might have made a few changes to it recently, but they might pay for 100% for the first 20 days, and then it's like a percentage for the next 80 days or whatever it is. But after that 100 days, no, Medicare is not going to pay. And a lot of people do mistakenly think that.
Okay. So what we're left with, I think, is creative estate planning, I'll call it, which is a discussion for another day. Probably I need to get John Suckotch or somebody on the phone with me here to talk about that on a future podcast. But the other option, obviously, is long-term care insurance of some kind, right?
Yeah. So, how are you going to pay for this care? That's a big question.
Yep.
Long-term care insurance is an option. Sometimes people ask me, well, do I have to purchase long-term care insurance? Of course, you can pay for it right out of your checking account. The actual number one payer of long-term care services in the country is Medicaid, which is different than Medicare.
A big percentage too, I think. I remember the percentage being just insanely high. I've got a pie chart burned in my brain from years ago, but 70%?
I don't. It's 60-70%. It's a lot. It's a lot. Is Medicaid. And so obviously the question is that sustainable long-term, over the graying of America, is Medicaid going to be able to continue doing that?
It's a good question. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. So that's a important consideration. So if you're going to be paying for it out of pocket or transferring the risk to an insurance company, or Medicaid, but Medicaid isn't going to pay a dime until you've exhausted your other resources. I won't get too in detail, but there's what's called countable assets and non-countable assets, and you have to spend down your countable assets unless you've done some, Medicaid planning in advance, and there's different things you can do with attorneys and stuff. But also, if you're relying on Medicaid to pay for your long-term care services, we talk about control and having control over where you're going to stay and how that care is going to be administered. And anytime someone else is footing the bill for anything in life, you don't really get much say. So
right.
I think for a lot of folks, that's an important consideration. And then the only question is, okay, well, do I want to self-insure this risk, or do I want to transfer this risk to an insurance company?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously that you mentioned a lot of things there, actually. My mind's racing now. So, because I've been dealing with this with a couple clients recently, where you have, say a smaller bucket of money. We're not talking ultra wealthy here. We're saying, somebody who has, say, $350,000, $400,000 liquid net worth. So this is investment assets. They don't want to lose that money, obviously. What's the average cost of long-term care? The last I checked was like $7,000 a month. It's probably higher now, isn't it? I don't even know what it is today. Yeah.
So, well, it depends on the care, right? So if it's just help in the home with, the activities of daily living, like we were discussing.
So you have to stay at home. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, maybe $3,000-$4,000 per month.
Still a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, still high. But yeah, if you're going, into a nursing facility, which is obviously the most expensive, oh, absolutely, $8,000-$9,000 per month.
Okay, yeah, so it's even higher than I thought then.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I used to joke, like, don't retire and go to the nursing home in Alaska, because I think it's something like $10,000 or $11,000 a month in Alaska. not that anybody listening has a goal of retiring in Alaska, but
right.
And nothing against the Alaskans, by the way. I don't want to offend anybody here. don't want any hate mail. So either pay for it yourself out of pocket, and at $9,000 a month, that's a pretty big nut. And if you take $9,000 a month out of your retirement portfolio, and your liquid net worth, you're checking your savings, your brokerage accounts, IRAs, Roth IRAs, that can go pretty quick. So we're left with hoping we don't go into a nursing home, and hope isn't exactly the best strategy. Doing some sort of advanced, creative Medicaid planning, or transferring that risk to an insurance company. So what are the different types of options if I want to buy long-term care insurance? Because I know, 15 years ago, there was just long-term care insurance and that was it. Whereas today, now there's different types of strategies that we can use. I know you and I have implemented these several times with our clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try not to do too long of a history lesson here, but the traditional long-term care insurance, which just works as traditional insurance, those policies kind of started to be created in the 80s and 90s, and maybe before then too, but that's when they kind of started to catch on a little bit as far as being sold. And well, what ended up happening, through all of that was it was a new risk, and things were changing as far as the actuarial tables, and the morbidity tables and things like that. People were starting to live longer. We were able to do things medically to keep people alive, right? And that the actuaries who originally kind of set those policies up maybe didn't have the foresight to know all of that. And then also we went into a very low interest rate environment. So the insurance companies weren't able to perhaps get the, return on their investments that they were expecting. And people didn't let these policies go once they had them. They held on to them, so they weren't getting the lapse ratios that they had expected.
Right.
So a lot of factors came in, and they made policies that were just unlimited benefits, and they didn't charge enough premium for them, and they got themselves in trouble. And so what ended up happening was they had to go back to the departments of insurance and ask for rate increases. And so then there was a long period of rate increases happening where people, thought they were paying this for their policy. And
right.
And so that kind of soured people on the traditional long-term care insurance. And so the industry innovated. And what you ended up with out of all of that was the hybrid policies. And these are the strategies that, you and I have implemented with some of your clients. And the way that these work is you basically take a permanent life insurance policy and you combine it with long-term care insurance. And so, the way that a real hybrid policy works is it's a live, die, or change your mind policy. So if you live a long life and you need long-term care, you can use those benefits for long-term care services. You can use that death benefit, and a lot of times it's much larger than the death benefit for the long-term care pool of benefits. You can use that for long-term care services. But if you never have a long-term care event whatsoever, and you just pass away peacefully, then you have a life insurance benefit there that will just pass to your family. And most of these hybrid policies also have like a cash value component where if you would just change your mind for some reason, you could get some or all of your money back. And that solution has become a lot more popular because you don't have to worry about rates increasing on you.
Right.
You don't have to worry about, hey, what if I don't have a long-term care event? And you're able to get yourself substantial leverage, sometimes 3 to 5 times leverage for the money that you put into the policy to insure this risk.
That makes sense. And then, so basically it seems like a win-win-win. I mean, I've always felt like there's no reason for anybody to purchase a traditional long-term care insurance policy anymore these days. But is that an extreme way of thinking? Am I wrong?
I would say generally that's probably true. Not a lot of them are getting sold right now. So that would be an indication that consumers are choosing the alternative, be it this hybrid model, or there's even just life insurance policies with long-term care insurance riders where they're not even like that, what we just talked about. They are in a certain way, but it's more along the lines of, hey, I've got a $500,000 permanent life insurance policy and I can accelerate the death benefit for long-term care if I need it. And if not, then I've got the death benefit right there. So the industry has just innovated and created products that the consumer is choosing over the traditional long-term care.
And would you say that based on your experience and expertise today, that these hybrid policies are the best bang for your buck and kind of the best way to buy long-term care insurance these days? I do believe that.
But I don't want to necessarily just completely disregard the traditional long-term care policy because it is a lot of times a more affordable solution. And do we know 100% sure that these policies now won't have rate increases in the future? No, we don't know that with 100% certainty. And then once again, you still have the use it or lose it, which bothers some people, right?
Right.
Have the long-term care event, but the cost of the traditional long-term care policy is a lot less than the hybrid policy or the permanent policy with the long-term care rider. So I don't want to completely disregard it and say it doesn't. Sure. Especially because if somebody is able to afford that solution, and not the other solution, it may still be appropriate for them in their situation.
I guess I'm just going to think through this. And the reason why I asked you that question is because, I've just, like I said, there was a time, I think in our first episode that we did on life insurance, there was a time in my career before we were a fiduciary when I was also had a, life insurance license, long-term care, variable products. So, I'm still pretty dangerous on it when it comes to this stuff, but I'm not an expert on insurance. I wouldn't say like you are, not to your level. But I look at this and I think back at those old days where the only choice a client had was to buy a traditional long-term care insurance policy where it's like car insurance. You pay for it, you pay for it, you pay for it. If you never use it, you paid a ton of premiums, never got in an accident, and you never used it. And so you kind of feel at the end of the day like you wasted your money. Now, car insurance is different, of course, because you legally have to have it. You don't have a choice. So with long-term care insurance, you have a choice. And the issue I would always have is, in my whole career, would be if somebody has more than, say, $2 to $2.5 million in total liquid net worth. That's all investment assets from IRAs to Roth IRAs to brokerage accounts, trust accounts, and so on. If they've got $2.5 million or more, then I'm pretty comfortable saying, you know what, you're probably okay not buying it if you don't want to and if it doesn't concern you. The irony is that those people are probably in the best position to buy it because they can afford it. And whereas people who have, say, smaller buckets and nest eggs, will say, can't usually afford it as much as those who have more money, but they may need it. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. Absolutely. Go ahead.
So the dilemma that I would often find myself in is, for anybody who has less than 250 to 300, I just didn't know back in those days whether it made sense at all to own long-term care insurance financially, especially from a budget standpoint. And for anybody over 2.5 million, they didn't need to, but they had a choice, right? They could afford it and choose to insure, or they could choose not to. But in either case, they were probably going to be okay. But for the vast majority of good savers in this country, not a cross section of the economy, but our clients, I would say, our clients are not a cross section of the economy; they're a cross section of savers. So for everybody between, say, 250 and 2.5 million, though, there's this huge need to ensure that, and that's no pun intended, by the way, to ensure that if something were to happen to them and they needed long-term care, one of the two, if they're married, or both, worst case, that all of a sudden, all the money they spent all these years saving up is now going to get obliterated by the cost of long-term care. So for me, when I know from firsthand experience that the number one problem when it comes to buying health or buying long-term care insurance for individuals and couples is the cost and the chance that they would never use it and then turn around, 30 years from now and go, God, I spent all this money and it was totally worthless. Like I lost all this money. That's why I say, in my opinion anyway, it removes a lot of those barriers of fear that if I have a hybrid policy, that if I use it, if I have a long-term care need, then I have this death benefit that I can accelerate and use today to help pay for those long-term care expenses. If I never use it and I pass away, then my spouse, my heirs, my family, charities, they can get that money as opposed to it going into thin air and, like being thrown out the window. Mm-hmm. And if at any point in the future I say, you know what, I don't really want this thing anymore. I just want the money back, whether that's because it's a decision I made or because it's an emergency that I have that I need the money after, say, maybe some penalties or fees or interest, who knows? I don't know all the details, but you'd probably have to pay a little bit of something to get out, right? But you can have the money back, the majority of it. That seems like the best way to go for me. And it seems like it would make the decision a lot easier for, the average individual, I guess.
I think your thinking is completely correct in that regard. And I agree with you. And I think that's why you're seeing the consumer make that choice. And when we're talking about that broad consumer between the 250,000 and the 2.5 million, you're right. That is the subsection who should at least consider doing this planning. And they are, by and large, choosing the hybrid policy over the traditional policy. I always try to avoid any sort of absolutes. And
sure, yeah.
So I always still present the traditional with my clients as a solution, as a consideration. I'm seeing what you're seeing, or what you're saying. Most of the time, people are gravitating toward the hybrid policies and the ones, the live, die, or change your mind policies. And one last, talking about the 2.5 million and above folks, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and Barbara Walters all own long-term care insurance. Certainly isn't because they can't afford long-term care. They just saw, hey, this is leverage. I can get make the good financial decision to do this, and they did. I don't know the details of their policy as far as what they purchased and everything like that, but it is public information that and there's plenty of others. So it makes good financial sense in a lot of situations to do so.
I think once you get up into the $2-3 million range in terms of total savings, I think the reason why people buy it is because they just want to preserve as much of their assets for their family as possible. It's not even, in my opinion, at that point, it's not even long-term care insurance anymore. Really, it's truly retirement portfolio insurance. It's ensuring that you don't lose your money that you want to either be retained in your family for your spouse and or to stay in the family as a legacy to your kids, or to, like I said, to charities earlier, doing charitable planning. So I think that today a situation where a standalone use it or lose it long-term care policy might make sense is, I'm just thinking out loud here. What if somebody needs it, really has a family history, a really big family history of other family members that are, whether that's siblings, parents, going into nursing homes, needing memory care, let's just say. And they're also somebody who maybe is on more of a budget that maybe has, say, $500,000 in investment assets. So they want to insure because they think the probability is very high that they go into a nursing home for a period of time. So maybe they purchase a 6-year policy. And that 6-year policy pays for 6 years if they were to go into a nursing home or memory care facility. And it's less expensive, let's just say, than a hybrid policy. And they know that they'll lose it if they don't use it, but the probability of using it very high. Would that be, again, I'm just thinking out loud, would that make sense?
Yeah, that would make sense. I would say, where I see it, where I see the client gravitate toward that solution, a lot of times is where they really do want to do the planning. So you're talking about someone with a family history. Yeah. And generally speaking, if they've been through it, the family history is what's got it on their mind.
For sure. Yes.
But they do have budgetary constraints where that traditional long-term care policy is just much more attractive in their budget to be able to afford that coverage. That's exactly where you would see people be more inclined toward that policy. If the means exist to do the hybrid planning and you're going to move forward with it, then usually that's where people will go. Just because what we talked about, you've got, and you even have that exit strategy where, and honestly, there aren't any fees or anything to get out of the policy.
Really? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
the hybrid, you're saying?
Yeah, the hybrid, there aren't any fees out of the policy. Now, the one caveat to that, I guess, is and you'd have to have gains in your cash value, right?
Tax.
It's a taxable event, right? Yeah. But as far as anything the insurance company is going to charge you for getting out of the policy, no. Okay.
So client owns buys a long-term care insurance policy at, say, 55, and they still own it 20 years later at 75, and they want out. They're going to pay some tax on the gains that have been made inside the policy, but otherwise they're just getting their cash back.
Right. If there are any gains, because a lot of times there won't be. But, It just kind of depends on the situation. So only if there are gains, then the gains would be taxable. But if there are no gains, then no, they just get the money back because it's just a return of basis.
Okay. And speaking of age, this common question, at what age should someone consider buying a long-term care insurance policy? How young is too young? How old is too old? Not to put, hard lines here, but generally.
Generally, I would say about the earliest for your best savers, your earliest planners, your people who really want to get a jump start on it, maybe people who have a family history of early onset Alzheimer's or something like that. The earliest I would say is age 50. The oldest that you're going to want to do this planning is 70 to 75
okay.
range. The sweet spot is 55 to 65, with like age 60 being kind of, I think, prime territory, especially when you're looking at it from, I'm not paying because you're either going to pay as you get older, it's going to be a higher premium, right? So I'm not paying
you pay for longer
premium for less years, but I'm not paying the lower premium for so many extra. It's somewhere right around that age 60. That's a sweet spot. So 55 to 65, people who are planning their retirements,
Yeah, I typically say that 55 is when you need to start looking at it, but I always worry that, there's that off chance, albeit, a very low probability that someone actually needs long-term care at, say, 58. I mean, that would be so unlikely, but I suppose it's possible.
And that's where the family history of like an early onset Alzheimer's or something like that, if you have that in your family history, then 55 or 52, or you know what I'm saying? You start having a conversation at least and evaluating your options and figuring out, is this something that I'm going to do? Right.
Well, we talked about a lot today. I'm going to recap everything real quick here. I mean, we talked about, what long-term expenses are, what long-term care expenses are, just, to say what are these costs and how much do they cost? We talked about the fact that Medicare really doesn't pay for much. So there's this myth out there that Medicare will take care of, these long-term care costs, when no, I mean, they might help with some rehab, something along those lines, physical therapy, but you're not getting more than 100 days of long-term care out of Medicare. And then we talked about how there's the older, but still applicable, traditional long-term care insurance policies that are like car insurance, where you pay a premium. If you use it, you use it. If you don't, you lose it, right? You lose your premiums. I should also add that there's return of premium riders that you can add to those policies. But in my opinion, and again, I'm going off the reservation here, but in my opinion, when you start adding return of premium riders, which just basically means that if you decide down the road in a traditional long-term care policy, that you want your money back, that you can get all your money back. Problem is that it's so expensive when you add a long-term care return of premium rider to a policy, in my opinion. So you've got your traditional policies, use it or lose it. Now you have these newer, which are very exciting, in my opinion, hybrid policies that give you the choice of using it if you need it. Your family gets a death benefit if you never use it. So somebody gets the money if you're gone, or a money back guarantee, we'll call it, if you decide you never want it down the road and you just don't want to use it anymore. And I think that's psychologically, I hate to say it, but that's what it is. It's psychology. I think that people generally don't want to see their money get thrown out the window. And that's been the problem with these traditional long-term care policies. It's not that they're bad policies. It's that people don't want to buy them because they're worried, what if I don't use it? And I think that these new hybrid policies fix that psychological dilemma. And even if they are a little bit more expensive, but even then, even though they're more expensive, you can still get your money back. So anyway, I digress. And then of course, if you're somebody who either A, is uninsurable due to a health concern that you currently have, something that would make it impossible to get underwritten and purchase long-term care, or if you're somebody who still says, I'm still not interested in this, I'd rather do some other creative planning. I think that's when we would get into the weeds in terms of talking about Medicaid planning, getting with an attorney and getting really creative on an estate planning front. So is there anything else we missed today, Dan?
No, I think we pretty much have it all covered.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up our third and final episode here of insurance. First, again, we did life. Second was disability. And today we've got long-term care. So feel free again to share this episode with your friends and family. And if you'd like to discuss your personal situation further with myself or Dan, please remember you never ever have to be a client to ask a question. If you'd like to set up an intro call or a Zoom meeting, just head over to our website, to our contact page, and you can get access to our calendar there. Send us an email or a phone message. As I always say, there's thousands of podcasts out there, and you chose to give hours a listen today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe again on iTunes and YouTube, as well as signing up on libertaswealth.com to not only get these updates, as well as other screencasts, videos, articles, columns delivered directly to your email inbox. Feel free to follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/LibertasWealth. I'm also on Twitter at Adam Koós and on Instagram at Financial Surgeon as my voice gets hoarse. So thank you so much once again for joining us. Dan, thank you for joining me. And we'll
thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Cash Podcast with your financial surgeon, Adam Koós. To see any charts or images that were mentioned in this show, or to check out additional articles, videos, and other educational resources, head over to libertaswealth.com.